All right, let's talk about something that's on the mind of pretty much every physician out there. Malpractice risk. I know, it's a stressful, often confusing part of the job. But, just understanding the landscape, that's the first, most crucial step to navigating it safely. So, let's dive in. I want you to picture your medical career like this field you see here. It's just filled with red flags. And each one of those flags, well, that's a potential risk, a situation that could, maybe, lead to a malpractice claim. The thing is, you can't avoid the field entirely. That's just part of being a doctor. But what you can do is learn to navigate it with skill and with awareness. And look, the scale of this issue, it's just huge. An estimated 75% of physicians, and that's even in lower risk specialties like family medicine, will face a malpractice claim by the time they're 65. Think about that. For most of us, it really becomes less of a question of if it'll happen and more a question of when. Okay, so let's try to get a better handle on this whole field of red flags. I mean, how common are these lawsuits, really? And what is it about them that makes them such an unavoidable part of the profession? So that 75% number, that's a lifetime risk. But what does that look like year to year? Well, every single year, about 5% of family physicians are sued. And yeah, that number is trending down a little bit, which is great, but it still means that in any given year, thousands and thousands of your colleagues are going through this incredibly difficult process. So to really protect yourself, you've got to understand the rules of the game, right? You need to know what a patient who becomes the plaintiff actually has to prove to win a malpractice case. Knowing their playbook is absolutely key to building your own defense.
The entire game really hinges on this one concept, the standard of care. And it's not about being perfect or having some kind of crystal ball. The question a jury asks is actually pretty simple. Did you act as a reasonably competent and skilled peer would have in the very same situation?
A patient can't just win a case because they're unhappy with the outcome. Nope. They have to prove all four of these elements. First, that you, the doctor, had a professional duty to them. Second, that you breached that duty by falling below the standard of care. Third, that your specific breach directly caused their injury. And finally, that they suffered actual, real damages because of it.
Now, that first point, duty of care, it sounds simple, right? And usually it is, but man, it can get tricky. The source material tells this cautionary tale about a physician who got sued after giving some informal advice at a party. Yeah, a party. That casual chat was actually enough to establish a duty of care in court. It's such a clear warning. Those sidewalk insults are a minefield.
And this is a really, really important point to remember. We're not in a criminal trial here. The plaintiff doesn't have to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. They only need to show a preponderance of the evidence. All that means is that it's just more than 50% likely that you are at fault. It's a much, much lower bar to clear.
All right, so we know the rules of the game. Now let's talk about the most common traps. Where do primary care physicians most often get into trouble? Well, as it turns out, the danger zones are incredibly specific.
And lucky for us, there's a really simple mnemonic to help remember them, and it could honestly save you a world of trouble. The key is to listen to Bach. No, not the classical music, but it's a super powerful tool for managing your risk.
So what does BATCH stand for? We've got breast cancer, appendicitis, colon cancer, and heart conditions, specifically missed MIs. And the L in listen? That stands for lung cancer. A delayed diagnosis in any of these 5 areas is, by far, the single biggest pitfall.
I mean, look at this. It's just staggering. A full 77% of all malpractice cases against primary care physicians fall into those 5 batch categories. Think about that. If you just really tighten up your process and your documentation for these 5 conditions, you've basically eliminated the vast majority of your risk. Okay, so we've identified the biggest landmines in the field. Now for the good part. Let's build your defensive playbook. What are the concrete, practical strategies you can start using in your daily practice, like with your very next patient?
And let's start with maybe the single most powerful tool you have at your disposal, your documentation. It's not just a record, it's your best defense. So how do you make your notes truly lawsuit-proof? Just look at the difference here. It's night and day, right? The weak note, diagnosis, GERD, that's just a conclusion. And honestly, it's indefensible because it doesn't show your work. But the strong note, that documents your thought process. It explains why you thought it was GERD, that you considered more dangerous alternatives, and that you shared the plan with the patient. Now that is a defensible note.
So if you're looking for a great framework to help you write notes like that, check out the SOAP note. It builds on the classic SOAP note we all know, but it adds options, advice, and an agreed plan. These extra steps basically force you to document shared decision-making, which is incredibly powerful protection in court.
But here's a huge word of warning. Those generic, boilerplate phrases like discussed risks and benefits, they're essentially worthless in court today. You have to get specific. What were the risks? What were the benefits? What did the patient actually say? The details are your defense.
Another huge trap is prescribing, where simple abbreviations can lead to absolute disaster. Writing MgSO4 for magnesium sulfate can easily be mistaken for morphine sulfate. QD for every day can get misread as QID, which is 4 times a day. These aren't just typos, they are potentially fatal errors that are so easy to avoid just by writing things out in full. Okay, now for a situation that I think gives every clinician anxiety. You know what the right next step is, but the patient says no. What do? How do you protect yourself and, more importantly, the patient? The absolute key here is to document a really thorough conversation. You need to show that you explained the risks of them refusing, you offered a specific alternative if one was possible, and you documented that entire exchange. Just scribbling "patient refused colonoscopy" in the chart is not going to cut it. You've got to show you tried to find another way forward together.
All right, as we start to wrap this up, it's so important to bring this all back to the real core of what we do in medicine. All of these strategies, really, they're just expressions of that fundamental principle, primum non nocere. First, do no harm.
Really, at the end of the day, it all boils down to this simple equation. Your best protection isn't some fancy legal team, it's the quality of care you're already providing. Excellent communication with your patients, combined with thorough documentation of your medical decision-making, that is the strongest shield you will ever have.
And that leaves us with one final question, a challenge for you to take into your very next patient encounter. It's so easy to just write down the diagnosis, but the real challenge and your best defense is to take that extra minute. So, how will you document your thought process and not just your final conclusion?